stuck into the report. So we're going to kick off with the IOIC's Future of Communication white paper. So they've published a substantial paper, which is making the case for internal communication as a strategic powerhouse in an increasingly turbulent world of work. So it covers the forces reshaping organizations, AI, geopolitics, the climate crisis, shifting workforce expectations, and it argues that internal comms is uniquely positioned to respond. It proposes some new specialist roles like a chief trust officer, a head of listening, head of culture and community, things like that, and a significant skills uplift across areas like behavioural science, scenario planning and data literacy. The ambition is really strong in this, and I've seen so many posts and articles on LinkedIn from consultants, mainly consultants, I think probably some practitioners, but consultants really applauding this report, talking about how it's really talking about the strategic direction for internal comms, that it's lifting it up and out of channels, and really saying how great it is from some of that side. That's where this gets a little bit uncomfortable for me, because there are two issues for me when I was reading the report. As I was reading through it, I scribble on my reports, and as I was reading it, I was writing, aren't these the kind of problems that belong in the boardroom? Now, I'm not saying that internal communication doesn't belong in the boardroom, but the conversations it's suggesting are the responsibility of internal communication feel like they aren't the responsibility of internal communication function. So I think there is that. The other thing is that the report talks a lot about communication that builds trust and connection, but it's written in a way that I felt practitioners would find quite hard to read. There was a lot of jargon in here. There were words like idiosyncratic. There were so many phrases that I was like, has AI kind of written this, or is this really how we're talking about stuff? Because this isn't plain English, and I think that's part of our job, is to make things clear, and that felt really uncomfortable for me. So my question for you, having read the report, because I've made you read them all, is do you think the role of internal comms can and should expand this much, or are we trying to enter into organisational design territory, and are we kind of straying maybe just too far out of our lane?
I do think there's a lot of room for growth. And here's where I want to come in. When you talk about that I see solving problems that belong in the boardroom, if there are problems that aren't being solved in the boardroom, that's not to say that communications can't help solve those problems before they get to the boardroom. That's where I like to see communicators as problem solvers. How can we use communication to solve challenges in the organization? When I read the report, there were a couple of things at the very beginning that stood out to me. One, it sort of leaned into the cliche of like, quote unquote, unprecedented challenges. I don't know, man. I feel like people during World War I, World War II, like I felt like not everything is unprecedented. I feel like we've gone through some of these things before. Maybe the circumstances and the facts are a bit different. So I think it's setting us up for like, well, this is just, we've never seen anything like this before. Well, I think we have in some regards. And then the other part too, where it said that there's this thing of people are thinking that AI will quote unquote think for us. I don't know that I've ever thought that AI would think for me. I've thought about AI as doing the work for me, but I never thought about it as AI thinking for us. So I think that was a bit odd for me, that it's taken this assumption around AI that I don't know that is really held. So yeah, not a lot, I would say, stood out to me. Some of the things were around like people drowning in executive requests. I don't know that that's one of those curses of, do you want to work with executives or do you not? Do you want a seat at the table or do you not? So if you have those and you're drowning in executive requests, is that what you asked for? And I think the part where you mentioned around some of these roles around like chief trust officer and some of these other things out there, those feel very temporary for me. Those feel like the kind of role that gets laid off pretty easily during budget cuts. So I don't want to lean into like titles too much, but I do think trust is one of those areas that comms can certainly help solve in organizations.
Yeah, so there's two other things that have thrown up for me, which I think have come from reading all the reports. But one of them is, I remember when employee engagement roles started to come in, because I'm wise beyond my years, so I remember it. But I remember people talking about if we create a role for employee engagement, does that take away the responsibility of employee engagement from managers and everyone else that has a role to play? And I think that did happen a bit. And I think if you have things like a chief trust officer, they're the jobs of leaders. So I don't want to take that away from leaders. The other thing for me that I've come to after reading all of these, which I think I'm going to write about a bit, is there are so many problems in organisations that can be solved by communication. That's a whole part of my first book about influential internal communication, how you can streamline your communication to create an efficient and engaging organisation. That doesn't mean that all of those solutions are the job of the internal communication function. And I think that might be where I feel a little bit uncomfortable. I feel like we're compounding the two things of communication solves a lot of problem in organisations. That doesn't mean that the internal communication function is where those solutions need to sit. And I think that's where I'm starting to feel like there's a tension there that it's not quite sitting with me. But that, I think, has come from reading all of the reports, not just this one. But you gave me a little segue in to talk about that. So.
Well, I think that this other point I want to bring about, when you talk about this, like research as a whole, I don't think communicators need another document telling them to be strategic. I think they know that. What they need is the company to resource the function properly. Mm-hmm. Like that's really what they need. They don't need something telling them to be strategic. In fact, I think there are times where we let that driver of being strategic actually get in the way of getting the stuff done.